Welcome to Contemporary First Nation Voices. This is NBE 3C, Grade 11 English College Level, and this is Jillian Percy. Today is Class 27, and we're going to be working on assignments 41 and probably 42. Here are all the ways to contact us. The studio is 1-800-465-7144. The office is 1-800-667-3703, extension 2211. My email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. Facebook is capital G, capital P, ERCY, space capital W, AHSA. If you are reach out to me on Facebook, please do a friend request, but also include a little message telling me who you are and which class you're in. And then for YouTube, that is our recorded classes, and there's two different channels. There is my teacher channel that has only my stuff from the last 2 years. And then there's the WASA Distance Education channel. That is the school channel, and it has everybody's stuff on here. Okay. There are multiple ways to hand in work. First of all, you can give it to the DEC at the Learning Center and ask them to scan it. You can also fax it over to us. If you fax it, please make sure that you've got the writing nice and dark, because otherwise it doesn't work very well. All right, sorry, I'm just trying to get it a little bit cooler in here. You can also scan it yourself using a scanner app on the phone. You can mail it, but if you mail it, be sure to hang on to the originals because that tends to take a long time and things do sometimes get lost. You can share documents with me through Google Docs. You can also hand assignments in with photograph. If you're doing the photographs, make sure they're clear, not blurry, preferably written in pen so it's dark enough to read. The photo should be taken with the phone parallel to the assignment so the writing doesn't get distorted. And please don't just click the share button. When you do that, it comes up as an odd size. And don't cut and paste it into the email. Instead, save it as a file and attach it as an email. This is like a little poster on how to use a scanner app. This one is for Adobe Scan, which is what I use. It's free. Adobe's a really reliable company. Basically, you download it, then you open it up, take a picture. I know it seems a lot like it's just taking a photograph, but because it's designed for documents, it just reads things like writing a lot clearer than a simple photograph does. So you can play around with the borders and then you just kind of repeat these steps until you've got all the pages from your assignment done. Tell it continue. You can preview it and see if you want to retake anything or if you need to reorder it. Then you save the PDF, give it a name, like whatever assignment number plus the course. And then you can save it to your Google Drive or your Dropbox or wherever you'd like to save things. Then write me a little email and attach it and you can send it to me. Okay, this is the plan for week 9. This is our last week. Okay, so if you are have any questions about it, now you can still keep on working on this, right? But this is the last week for new classes. We are going to be working on Unit 4 all week. Sorry, those dates are I just noticed those dates are not quite right. So today's date is, of course, actually April 7th. All right, I will fix those for tomorrow. My apologies. As you know, this is the newer version that we're working on right now. So if you have the original version from the beginning of the year, some of the numbers and assignments are a little bit different. You are welcome to give me a phone call and I'll send you the revised version. However, if you end up doing the original, that's fine too. The problem we were having was some of the web links to certain assignments weren't working anymore. Okay. So Unit 4, just beginning reading, research, and reflection. And we're starting with lesson number 16. Okay, so we're going to be working on a novel study. And in this lesson, you're going to learn about intergenerational trauma and understand how the damage done to one individual can be transmitted to their children and grandchildren. We will also begin a novel study of your own choosing. So one of the issues that has continued to affect Indigenous communities is how the damage done by racist legal policies, events, and organizations such as the Indian Act, the 60s Scoop, and the residential school system has continued to cause damage to communities, even to members that didn't experience the trauma of these events firsthand. Recently, research has been done to better understand this issue and help people understand why the damage done to different individuals in the past has continued to harm Indigenous peoples and their communities for many generations. So then I've included a little article on this issue. I have edited this article. It's a very long article and it has a lot of kind of highfalutin vocabulary. So I've tried to simplify it a little bit, okay? This is called Intergenerational Trauma in Residential Schools. It is an article by Peter Menzies, originally published in March 25th, 2020. Historical drama occurs when trauma caused by historical oppression is passed down through generations. For more than 100 years, the Canadian government supported residential school programs that isolated Indigenous children from their families and communities. See the residential schools in Canada. Under the guise of educating and preparing Indigenous children for their participation in Canadian society, the federal government and other administrators of the residential school system committed what has since been described as an act of cultural genocide. As generations of children left these institutions, they returned to their home communities without the knowledge, skills, or tools to cope in either world. The impacts of their institutionalization in residential school continue to be felt by subsequent generations, and this is called intergenerational trauma. The study of intergenerational trauma, which researchers also call transgenerational trauma, is a developing field. The phenomena is often examined as part of research into historical trauma. Preliminary studies have focused on Holocaust survivors and their offspring. In 1966, Canadian psychiatrist Dr. Vivian M. Rakoff wrote one of the first articles on the paper. His papers focused on family dynamics, particularly between parent and child. Subsequent studies described high rates of psychological distress among children of Holocaust survivors. Some noted their specific behavioral patterns, including being overly protective of their parents, needing a high level of control, exhibiting an obsession with the Holocaust, and having immature dependency. There's a very famous Canadian called Gabor Mate, who's also done a lot of work on this too. Higher than level rates of ADHD in the children of mothers who were pregnant during the Holocaust and all that kind of stuff. As early as the 2010, researchers began examining the intergenerational effects of the residential school system on Indigenous people and communities across Canada. Many children experienced psychological, spiritual, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of their so-called caregivers in the residential school system. So there's all these little notes about see this. It's because there's references to other articles is what that is. On an individual level, the long-term impact of residential school experiences has left many former students facing significant psychological challenges. These range from heightened feelings of anger, anxiety, low self-esteem, and depression to post-traumatic stress disorder and high rates of suicide, among other things. In a national survey conducted between 2008 and 2010, members of First Nations communities identified managing substance use as the #1 challenge for community wellness. Parenting models. Residential schools included parenting models based on punishment, abuse, coercion, and control. With little experience of nurturing family environments from which to draw, generations of residential school survivors struggle with residual trauma. As adults, many are ill-prepared to nurture their own children. The effects of these chaotic family systems can be seen in the high rates of family violence and domestic partner abuse. While Indigenous children represent less than 8% of children under 14 years of age in Canada, they make up nearly 54% of children in the care of child welfare authorities. In her 1991 work, Impact of Residential Schools and Other Root Causes of Poor Mental Health, Maggie Hodgson summarizes the cumulative impact of the loss of parenting knowledge and skills across generations. If you subject one generation to that kind of parenting and they become adults and have children, those children become subjected to that treatment. And then you subject a third generation to a residential school system, the same as the first generations. And then you have a whole society affected by isolation, loneliness, sadness, anger, hopelessness, and pain. High levels of Indigenous unemployment, a disproportionate number of Indigenous people involved in the justice system, high rates of Indigenous homelessness in urban centers, and poor housing conditions in many First Nations communities all share a root cause, Canada's residential school policy. So it's basically describing that these are kind of like trickle down effects of what happened, right? Transmission of intergenerational trauma. Psychological and sociological researchers are exploring theories about how trauma is transmitted from one generation to the next. They are trying to understand the persistent nature of trauma-induced symptoms that continue to affect the well-being of many Indigenous individuals, their families, and their communities. Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart first documented the impact of historic loss in her study of grief as experienced by the Lakota community in the late 1990s. More recent scholars have offered theories on the origins of the trauma among Indigenous peoples in Canada. Okay, so at this point, I had to do some summarizing because it gets kind of technical and I wanted it to be understandable. And the reason we're talking about this is because we're about to do a novel study. The original novel study that we have for this particular assignment is really a lot of trauma, and dealing with trauma is often a really significant factor in a lot of Indigenous novels. So I kind of wanted to make sure that this concept was introduced before you began reading, okay? So there are three main models about how this might happen. So these models are theories. They're not quite sure. It could be one or it could be all of them really, but we're just kind of looking at these ideas. There's a socio-cultural model, a psychological model, and a physiological model. All these models look at different ways that damage and trauma to one person could be passed along to their children. Okay, so socio-cultural, that means social is kind of the society and cultural is obvious. Okay, so this model focuses on parenting styles and how they can influence child development. In this model, it's assumed that children learn from the people in their immediate environment, such as their parents. Children who experience abuse or neglect in their environments are unable to develop the type of coping skills they need to deal with life's stresses. In some communities, many families lack the knowledge and skills to help support the children in developing healthy emotional skills and well-being. And the idea is because they weren't taught it themselves, right? That wasn't a function of residential school. So it's harder to pass on things that you were never taught. Because of this, it becomes harder to change behaviors that have become normal to that community. These negative behaviors are then passed on to the next generation. Especially if a community is isolated, they may have little access to seeing alternate parenting models, and so the cycle continues. Okay, so that's one theory. And again, that's simplified a little bit, all right? Psychological model. In this model, the focus is on how the attachment of the parent is to their child. An ability to understand and respond to the child's needs is considered crucial for the child to learn how to self-regulate. Self-regulate is kind of how to not just control your emotions, but like how to, if you're feeling stressed out, how to calm yourself down. If you're feeling kind of low, how to lift yourself up, sort of how to modulate your own emotions and energy levels, that idea. Even babies can have their development affected if their needs are not met in a way that helps them feeling secure, safe, and loved. This is kind of a new thing, right? For a long time, people felt like babies were so little that they really didn't remember stuff. And therefore, what happened to them kind of really couldn't impact them. And basically, there's been a lot of studies since then that realized, like, no, that's just not true. Even though we don't, with our conscious mind, remember things that happened as a baby, unconsciously, if we were living in an unsafe environment or if we were unloved or whatever, we do kind of subconsciously still remember those things, and it does have an effect on us. This can have delays in their thinking abilities and their coping strategies, which affect their abilities to be successful in school and other social settings. These same issues can affect whole communities if they've all had that attachment between parent and child disrupted, which creates a cycle that repeats with the next generation. It's a really interesting study at one point based in, I think, Romania, where there were a lot of children, I think due to war, who were being placed in orphanages, and they were babies. And so they were being fed and they were being changed, but they weren't being held or loved or played with in the way that you would in a typical family. And again, at that time, people didn't realize how important that was. And as those children grew up, they had a very hard time functioning in any kind of um, environment because they hadn't learned that love, being loved and how to love is something that you learn even as babies. And it was something that they found they couldn't teach the children once they had grown up. I don't know at what age it became a thing that they couldn't do, but a lot of people were kind of involved with adopting the children and trying to teach them. And they found it just had this long lasting effect. And people were really surprised. They really didn't understand at that point that that was going to have a problem. They didn't think that babies really understood love or knew love, which sounds crazy to us now, but it was kind of a thing back then. Okay, physiological. Physiological means like literally how it affects your body. Okay. So this model focuses on genetic or biological factors to explain how trauma can be transmitted to the next generation. And this theory suggests that toxic levels of stress can be caused by a child's environment and traumatic events. This can be either while they're still in the womb or when they're younger. That level of stress can actually cause changes in the child's brain due to the effect the trauma has on the levels of chemicals in your brain. Things like cortisol, dopamine, serotonin. Those are chemicals we all have in our brain, and they help us to feel calm, feel happy, respond to danger. The problem is if we're kind of in a situation where we constantly are responding to danger, then we can end up with way too much of one chemical and not enough of like the feel good chemicals. And that can have a long lasting effect. It also affects the child's ability to handle other stressful situations. This can cause high levels of activity and affect concentration and learning abilities. This is about what we were talking about, where they found out that the babies of mothers who had been through the Holocaust um, had high levels of ADHD. Um, yep, just talking about that. It can actually affect how their genes function as well. This can cause the child to have a negative response to stress and can be genetically passed down to the next generation. Like I said, I have modified this to try and make it a little more simple. You're welcome to go back and read the original if you find it an interesting concept. Okay, support question. Remember, support questions are not for marks. They're just to kind of help us think about what we're reading and make sure we understand it a little better. That's all. Okay. So, how does individual trauma occur? I mean, it can occur in a lot of different ways, but one way is definitely being taken away from your family, being abused physically or sexually, not having your basic needs met, like food, safety, warmth, all those kind of things can create trauma. Okay. How can individual trauma become intergenerational trauma? Well, there's three different theories. Basically, um, they've just kind of learned that what happens to the parents does affect the children, which again, they didn't realize before. The three main theories, there's a sociocultural one, there is the psychological one, and there is the physiological one. So in sociocultural, it's all about learning good parenting behaviors. The idea in that one is because people didn't learn good parenting behaviors in residential school, their children weren't able to learn them either. And because whole communities were affected, there weren't healthy parenting behaviors to sort of imitate and copy. Psychological is that the attachment between parent and child was broken, and then that kind of caused long-term effects. And then the physiological one is that the brain chemicals actually got changed, and that causes long-term effects. So how does the concept of intergenerational trauma help explain the long-lasting effects of events such as the 60s scoop and residential school, right? So sometimes you may have, if you're older, you may have heard people be like, well, why aren't people over this yet? Why is it still affecting people? Well, because it's not really that long ago, first of all, but because of these, we're not sure kind of exactly, but because of these different possible models, these types of damage that were done to one individual continue to affect the next individual and the next individual. And again, when it's happened to multiple community members, then there's kind of an ongoing effect, and it's hard to sort of break that cycle is the idea. Okay, so novel study. So I am giving you some choice. The school has selected the novel From the Ashes for this novel study. However, I have read it and it is a bit dark. And I know we have some younger students taking this course. So I was a little bit concerned about whether people might find this book a little bit upsetting. It deals with issues of physical and sexual abuse, as well as drug and alcohol use. And I'm worried about people finding this triggering. So you are welcome to read From the Ashes, but you also have the option of choosing another book that you want to study, okay? However, you have to check in with me on the book that you want to choose before you start. It must meet these criteria. It has to be written by a Canadian Indigenous author. It must have an Indigenous main character. It needs to be at least 150 pages long. It can be fictional or an autobiography. This one's actually kind of an autobiography, but it can't be a textbook. Like you can't be reading a history textbook. It also cannot be a novel that you've already studied in a different WASA course. Like we do Jimmy Comes Home in OLC 40. You couldn't do that one because that's already one that we study in that course, okay? So the book you choose should preferably deal with at least one of the issues we've studied in this course. Things like Indigenous identity and heritage, Indigenous culture and traditions, self-government or sovereignty, issues with racism, residential school trauma, the 60s scoop, Native languages, education, intergenerational trauma. If there's a book that's dealing with other issues that you think is still would be really good, just kind of shoot it by me. I'll take a quick look at it and just see, okay? All right. If you're hoping to use a different novel, just send me an email with the name of the novel, the writer's name, the date of publication, the number of pages. Now, the reason I'm saying the writer's name is occasionally there are novels that have the same title, like From the Ashes. There's actually two different books called From the Ashes, which I was kind of getting confused on the weekend when I was trying to read some stuff on it. So it's really common for titles to be the same or similar. So you have to tell me the writer's name too, so I know for sure what I'm looking at, okay? And I'll check it out and get back to you on whether it's a reasonable novel to choose or not, okay? So where can you find a different novel if you're wanting to read a different one? So first of all, if you're studying at one of our sister schools like PFC or DFC, there are almost certainly some appropriate books at the school library. You could ask one of your teachers there or the librarian to help you find some good stuff, okay? If you are in one of the northern reserves, you should probably have an elementary school. And a lot of times, not all, I know not all of them, will have some sort of library. Some of them will have like young adult sections or teenage sections. They may even have like an adult section of books. It's worth talking to whoever's in charge of the library in your area and see if you can take a look at that and borrow some. If you live in the Sioux Lookout or Dryden area, the public library will, again, certainly have options, and you can definitely talk to the librarian about possibilities. If you're looking for things, there are all sorts of online lists and sources of books. Some that come to mind easily, Goodreads is a really common book of lists. They've got one for in Canadian Indigenous books. You can check out that. Strong Minds is an Indigenous bookstore. They've got a list of adult or teenage books. Either one is acceptable. Like I said, I know I do have some teenagers taking this course. The Vancouver Public Library has all sorts of great lists. They do have one on Indigenous reads as well. So, you know, sometimes books aren't very much. If you're wanting to check out a different book, you're welcome to do that, okay? Okay, so before we kind of dive into the novel study, I wanted to talk about reading strategies, which we've talked about before. They're kind of the new way people like to talk about reading. Reading strategies are really just thinking strategies. They're just ways to practice thinking about what we read, okay? Sometimes in school, we get so focused on trying to say the words correctly if we're reading out loud that we forget to sort of think about what we're reading. And in addition, if you're English as a second language learner, it can be so much harder, obviously, to read a book in a second language if that's not the language that you grew up using, right? So this part can be really important, okay? We can use reading strategies before we read, during our reading, or after our reading. Some of the ones we've practiced or used so far are things like visualization, asking questions, making connections, activating background knowledge, making inferences, monitoring for comprehension, understanding fictional and nonfiction text features, prioritizing and summarizing, and locating the main idea and details. So at the beginning of a novel, most novels will try to get the reader engaged in the story, but they also want to orient you and help you understand where you are right away and who the characters are. So most novels are going to cover those kind of topics early on in the first few chapters, often right away in the first chapter. The setting, the main characters, and then pretty quickly the big problem or the goal will come into play. Not necessarily the first, maybe the second, third, or fourth. It kind of depends on the book and a little bit like on how long your chapters are. Setting. Most books will try to make the setting of the book clear as quickly as possible to help the reader envision the world. Remember that setting is both place and time. I'm going to talk about time first. That's the part that sometimes gets kind of confused or neglected. Time could be the future, the present, or the past. For books that are set in the past, it might be the recent past, such as the last 20 or 30 years, or the more distant past, like things that happened 100 or more years ago. Books may sometimes list an exact date that a book is occurring in, but not always. Sometimes the reader is supposed to make their own assessment based on the events and the background in the book. So, for example, a book that's clearly set in war times in Europe, but planes are pretty new and unreliable, that probably is World War I. A book that contains kids watching TV but not using computers or social media, that's got a little wider range of possible times. You might need to look at what other types of technology existed, what kind of cars were there, what kind of washing machines, what are people wearing, what type of slang is going on, what kind of rights are there, right? If all the girls are wearing skirts and none of the moms work, then maybe we're talking about the 40s or the 50s, right? If all the moms are going to work and the kids are playing outside, but the cars are kind of more familiar, maybe you're looking at more like the 80s or the 90s or something. So you kind of have to kind of make a little bit of a reasonable idea because it helps you understand what's happening in the story, right? The time frame a story is set in just has a huge impact on what type of events might happen in the plot, what the laws and the customs are, what kind of jobs are available, what family life is like, what types of human rights are available, and many other issues that are going to affect your characters. Having a rough sense of the time can make your characters' actions more understandable, or they may raise questions in your mind. For example, a female character who's hiding her engagement ring makes more sense if you understand that she was working during the decades when women typically did not work if they were married and often got fired if it was discovered that they had gotten engaged. Because it was like, well, they're probably going to get pregnant right away, so they'll be no good to us, so we're going to fire them. So women who got engaged would often hide it for a while because they wanted to hang on to their job as long as possible. That's not today, but that would have existed back in, say, when my father was a young man, so say 50s, 60s. Place is also an important part of any story. The country, province, city, town, res, or farm that the characters live in can affect what kind of jobs they have, what language they speak, what kind of geography around there. Like, are they in a desert? Are they somewhere where it's cold? Are there mountains? All those kind of things. Their personal income, the weather, what type of food they eat, and the amount of isolation they face. Does most of the action happen indoors or outdoors? Are they in a vehicle, at an office, in the home, or somewhere else entirely? All of those kind of decisions can really affect a novel, right? A novel that's written where everyone's on a space station and can never leave is different than a novel set in modern times where people can like hop on a plane and go all over the world. Okay, characters. Every good story needs characters to take actions, make choices, and explain the events. Most authors will give at least a little bit of description about what a character looks like so that the readers can picture them in their minds. The author may make the character's outward appearance match their inward personality, or they may make it a deliberate contrast to create an element of surprise or tension. So for example, the school librarian who dresses all in gray, keeps her hair back in a bun, and wears ugly black glasses may be a typical quiet, mousy librarian type character. But she might also be a secret leader of a political revolution, and her boring outfits are a type of camouflage so no one suspects her. So you don't want to make too many assumptions just based on their clothing until you know more about the character. Character traits. All characters can be described with some sort of inward personality traits. Traits are just like another word for like attributes or behaviors, that kind of idea. These traits could be negative or positive or a bit of both. Some novelists will write very flat, two-dimensional characters who fit a certain stereotype without any surprises or changes. Other novelists will write more three-dimensional characters who may have a wide variety of personality traits and might not be easily described as good or bad. Sometimes we can draw a blank on how to describe the characters, but you can check out the link below for more possible words to describe character traits. And there are all sorts of lists out there. I've seen like list of 50, list of 450, whatever works for you, you're welcome to use. It's sometimes I find people get kind of stuck on like nice, mean, good, bad, helpful, and then they kind of draw a blank. So having a list to look at can kind of jog your brain to have some new ideas. Because I know I don't keep a giant list in my head either, so I need to look at those too. Support your ideas. Remember that when you use a character trait to describe someone, you can't just pull it out of your head, like, oh, I just think they're this. You've got to support your choice with evidence from the book. Things that the character says or chooses, or what they do, or even how the narrator describes them can help support your idea. So for example, let's say I say Kay is very helpful. Well, I mean, maybe that's true, but I need to prove it. So I got to look at the book. Okay. I think Kay tries to be helpful whenever she meets someone having difficulties. She stops playing her video game in the store and goes hunting for the little girl she hears crying. Later on at the house, she gives her little brother most of her granola bar because he's so hungry. Even when the bully from class is having trouble with their homework, she offers to help them out. So here I am supporting my idea with specific examples from the book. You're going to need to do that in some of the questions, okay? Plot. When we looked at short stories, we studied a basic plot format. Generally, novels still follow that type of format. It's just that since novels are longer, there may be some other subplots that occur as well. So, for example, if the main part of the story is about a man who's faced a serious illness and how he slowly regains his health, there might also be, say, a subplot about how the illness kind of damaged his marriage and how he needs to repair that as well. Some novels may follow a slightly different plot format where the writer dives right into the middle of the main action and then kind of gives a little bit of backstory as they go along. Here is the classic structure. Here's the beginning. Again, this is where they normally tell you the characters and the setting. The rising action is where they're trying to accomplish something of some sort, or there's a problem that's occurred that they're trying to solve. And all sorts of things happen as they try and solve it. And the climax is the top part where it's most exciting. It's the big showdown part. And then as after the showdowns happen, falling action, things get less exciting, things start to get wrapped up, things start to get resolved. And then the final conclusion is kind of how the story ends. Okay, so that's what we call a five-part story structure. You've got the beginning or the introduction, the rising action, the climax, the descending action, or the final ending. Okay, so we're also going to be talking about conflict, which again, we've talked about before, but I just kind of want to go over it again. All stories would be pretty boring if there wasn't some type of conflict. There's generally considered to be about 7 main types of conflict. One is person versus their own self. Any kind of internal conflict, like you're trying to overcome addiction, you're trying to make a choice between right and wrong, you're trying to lose a bunch of weight, all those kind of things where you're really fighting with yourself, essentially. Every other type of conflict is considered an external conflict. Person versus person. any kind of competition or conflict with another person or even a group of people. Person versus nature or the environment. These are often survival stories where the main character is fighting against a hostile environment or a natural disaster like a hurricane, a tornado, a blizzard, a flood, a drought, or an earthquake. Then we've got person versus society. That's where you're fighting against the rules or customs of the society the character lives in. Person versus technology. This is where there's a fight against some sort of technological invention, which could be things like a computer virus, artificial intelligence, robots, even medical inventions, bioweapons, all those kinds of things. And then person versus fate or destiny. This is less common these days, but it does show up a lot in like the fantasy genre where a character has a certain destiny. They're just fated to do something or, be the secret king or whatever. And no matter how they try and run away from that destiny, they can't. They always end up back in the place where they have to face whatever's been foretold in some way. And then person versus supernatural. This is where you're fighting against some sort of supernatural creature or element. Things like zombies, werewolves, vampires, ghosts, witches, elves, magic formulas, or whatever, that kind of idea, right? Things like occur in, say, like Harry Potter, right? Okay. So now we're looking at the assignment. Number 41, this section is going to be worth 30 marks. First of all, write down the title of the book that you're going to be studying, okay? If it's not The Book from the Ashes, have you gotten my approval from the book? Yes or no? It's only two possibilities. If it's no, stop right now and check in with me before you go any further, okay? Because if for some reason it didn't meet the criteria, then you would have done all this work for nothing because I won't count it if it doesn't meet the criteria, okay? So please check in with me on whether the book you've chosen is a good book to use for this before you go any further, okay? And it's not because I'm trying to be mean. Sometimes people might accidentally pick something that I'm like, well, it's not going to work for the type of questions we're going to ask, because I've had to be kind of generic based on plot structure. So certain types of novels might not work, okay? And it does need to be focused on Indigenous because that's kind of the theme of this entire course. Number 2, before you begin the book, look at the list of reading strategies that we talked about up above. Pick at least 2 to 3 strategies that you think will be helpful in reading this novel. Explain why you think they'll be helpful in at least 3 to 4 sentences. So you're basically making a plan ahead of time of like, hey, these are the ways I'm going to start thinking about stuff as I read. Number 3, before you begin reading, take a quick flip through the book and approximately how many chapters are in the book. Sorry, I flipped those 2 words for some reason. Now, this sounds like a funny thing for me to wonder about, but the reason is some books have lots of chapters. Some books have tiny little chapters. It really kind of depends. I just kind of want to have a sense when I'm looking at your summaries of how many chapters there are, what could I be missing, what should I look for, that kind of idea. And this goes along with it is, what is a typical length for a chapter, okay? Sometimes chapters may be very tiny, say 1 to 5 pages, or more typically, maybe 6 to 10 pages, or 11 to 19 pages, or some books you might have a lot of very long chapters and it may be 20 pages or more. Now, nobody writes chapters so that they're all the exact same. So like if the first chapter is 2 pages, but most of the other chapters are 10, then pick 10, okay? Just go with what's most common, not every single one, okay? Then, now you're moving on to reading the book. Read the first 2 chapters or at least 25 to 30 pages in your book. And I'm having to say it this way because, like I said, I don't know how they set up the chapters in your book, okay? The one for From the Ashes has lots of tiny little itty bitty chapters. So if you only read the first 2 chapters, you wouldn't really understand very much. You really need to kind of read the first 25 pages. Whereas other books, you might understand a fair bit. It kind of just depends. So your first job, identify the setting of the novel. Please give some supporting details from the novel that help give you clues or information about the time or the place. Please include any important description of the place, whether it's a part of the story narration or the character's assessment of the place they live in. So if the character's going, this is the most wonderful place in the world, you would say that, right? If they're saying this is the most frightening place, you would say that because it's part of the setting, even if it may or may not be true, right? If the setting changes during the first few chapters, try to identify each of the settings in order. This section should be at least 5 sentences long, but it could be longer depending on your novel. So like some novels, people might be traveling. Maybe they start off in one city, then they end up on a farm, then they end up somewhere else. So if that's the kind of novel you're reading, you got to kind of let me know, hey, where are things moving towards? Then based on the description of the setting, try to visualize it. You can draw a picture or you can locate 2 to 3 pictures online that might help you picture the place they are in. So I'm going to kind of give you a quick example, all right? So let's say I am looking for a, let me do this. No, hang on a second, sorry. Canva's tricky sometimes. Let's say I'm reading a sci-fi novel, right? Science fiction, and it is set on a space station, okay? May have access to planets. So this one, maybe they're able to jet around to other place. Okay, well, I might have an idea in my head that I want to draw, or maybe I kind of take a little look around and just kind of try and picture some things. So I might say space station pictures. Okay, so these are not the type I was thinking of. These are what we actually have right now. I'm going to say in novels because I want, yeah, okay. So I want more the imaginary type, right? Not quite Star Trek necessarily, but okay, well, here's an example, right? So I might, oh, that's one. I can't take that one because it's got a copyright on it. Do try and pay attention to that, but they don't necessarily all have copyrights. Let me see. Okay. It's not so much a space station as that would be like a rocket ship. Let me see what else we've got here. See, now this is the type I was thinking of, the big round type. Okay, so I was thinking of that type where often they have like people living in that kind of circle spot. And I would say where I got it from. Hang on, I'm going to go visit to that because I want to make sure I credit my source. Okay. Now, if you're drawing, you only need to do one drawing. But if you are just, sorry, that didn't, up here is where it's saved my stuff. I would normally put like the words source. Hang on a second. Yeah, hang on a sec. Sorry, guys. I would put the word source. Hang on. It's being difficult. All right, I put the word source and then I would just cut and paste it in there. It's wanting to paste the whole picture in, but I just need the URL there, okay? And then I would look for like inside of a space station. Okay, so this one is like more like a space rocket. I could put drawings because I might get something more like cartoony. That might work better. I'm thinking of things like TV shows where I've seen things like Stargate and Star Bases and that kind of stuff. Hang on a sec. Now, these are stock photos. A lot of times, check it out. Sometimes you can use them, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can use them as long as you've got like the word sample on it or something, which is fine. That works just fine. Hang on. Can I go here? Okay, so here's an example of another one. And I would just kind of keep playing around. And the idea is just to give myself a little bit of an idea ahead of time of how I picture it. Now, as I read, more details may come out and I may change my mind. For each one of those photos, I would say where I got it from. And maybe you do 2 or 3 photos if you're doing photos. If you're drawing, one drawing is fine. That's okay. Number 5, what point of view is the book written from? Pick one of the choices below. first person, second person, third person limited, or, oh, they said third person unlimited, or what they sometimes call omniscient. That's the God view where you can kind of read in people's minds. After you've picked your choice, write down at least 3 sentences from the book and explain how they prove which point of view your book is written from. So here's an example of me doing that. Okay. This is from the novel The Giver. Jonas, nearing his home now, smiled at the recollection. Thinking still as he wheeled his bike into its narrow port, he realized that frightened was the wrong word to describe his feelings. Now that December was almost here, it was too strong an adjective. Now, so this book is written in third person limited. The main character is Jonas. It does not use first person point of view because it's not written directly as if he were talking to the reader by using the word I to describe his actions. He's not saying, I drove home, I was thinking. Instead, the word he is used, which is third person, like someone's kind of watching him almost. But it's limited third person because it doesn't really show what anyone else is thinking or doing. It's always limited to just what Jonas is seeing or hearing. Number 6, who is the main character of the book so far? A, describe their physical appearance in 3 to 4 sentences. B, describe their personality so far. Name at least 3 character traits that displayed and provide evidence from the first 25 to 30 pages that helps prove your opinion of their character. Now, that just means like give me like maybe 2 to 3 sentences for each character trait. Don't feel like you've got to trace it out for the entire novel, okay? And then briefly list some of the secondary characters in the book and write a few sentences describing their appearance and character. Now, this is from like chapters, say 1 to 3 or so, okay? Again, if your chapters are really tiny, it might be longer. I don't mean the entire book, that would probably be too many. So here's an example of how that might sound. And if I run out of time, my apologies, I'm so close to being done. These are some cuts from Hunger Games. In the book, the narrator says that Katniss and Gale could be brother and sister, and she describes Gale as having straight black hair, olive skin, and gray eyes. So apparently Katniss also has that. And then it goes on to say that she does not look like her mother and sister, who have blonde hair and blue eyes, as they are from another district. Later on, it's implied that she's extremely skinny because it says that all the children turned to skin and bones. And then at the very beginning of the chapter, when she's getting dressed, it says that she's wearing leather hunting boots, trousers, a shirt, and a cap, and her hair is long and braided. It doesn't really talk about the colors. It's just kind of giving us what it has. So that would be an example from the first chapter. And then if we were talking about her personality, Katniss demonstrates bravery as well as lawlessness through her illegal hunting of animals for food. The book states that the penalty for having a weapon would be severe in case people were trying to start a rebellion, but she has a bow and arrow. She has been hunting illegally since she was at least 11 when her father died, and she is clearly not bothered by the fact that this is illegal or that this behavior is very risky to her, like she could get punished for this, right? Then we've got C, some of the secondary characters. Prim is Katniss's little sister, who is skinny, and she has blonde hair and blue eyes. She is beautiful and loves animals. Katniss's mom, she is older and looks beaten down, although she used to be beautiful. She is from District 12 and left it to marry Katniss's dad. She has blonde hair and blue eyes. So let's go through some of the people that occurred in chapter 1. All right, number 7, read at least 2 to 3 more chapters or at least 45 more pages in the book, whichever one is longer. By this time, at least one major problem or goal should be been introduced, and then answer the next couple of questions. What is the big problem or goal that the main character is currently facing? Be as detailed as possible in describing it. And then B, based on the events so far and the personality of the characters, make some reasonable predictions of events that might happen in the middle section of the book. Please note that the events should not be simply a description of the character's feelings, but instead include a character's possible actions and the possible result. So I wouldn't just say Katniss is scared. I might say, you know, Katniss is scared when she gets enrolled in having to participate in the Hunger Games. I think maybe she'll get so scared that she will run. So I have to talk about what she might do, not just her feelings, okay? And then that is the end of that one. We didn't actually get to 42 today. We'll cover that tomorrow. If you have any questions with this assignment, give me a phone call and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And we will be back tomorrow with the next assignment. Take care.